Larry was a black man that I picked up one day from the local day labor business that provided men of staggering ability, or low character, dudes trying to get back on their feet, young stallions and old deer, earning a day's wage, a room for the night at a motel, and a meal is about what it equaled, about $81. The labor people that were providing the service kept 20%. I needed Larry that day to help me clean a few bus stops. He was old, that was the first thing about him, tall and thin, but sickly-like, and the lines in his face looked like they hurt. They weren't deep or scarred, or anything like that, it was more the frequency of them, and how they owned his complexion, they stood out further than the flat parts. His eyes were sad and hollow, and I thought he was probably about 60. His head floated above him, like there was something he was trying to hear, a desperation in his voice, honest, but battered, it echoed, each word, like DiMaggio, everything he said seemed to vibrate, but not grand or inspiring, instead guttered, from a low place. But he was happy to see me, a young guy, with a big white van that still smelled new, except for the stiff waft of Newport smoke that I blew past him, within the first couple of seconds of our meeting. He hopped in, clearing his face through the smoke, and asked me if it was all right if he drank his beer. "Shit man, you should have brought me one," I said. And off we drove. Larry moved in phases, stagnant and without motivation, as if he was pushing back against it, but not strong enough to break the beam. He was shut down. Some tattered brown trousers that hung more than fit, draped over the top of his beat-up shoe, black and outdated. His flannel shirt looked as if he'd borrowed it, it was too new and cheap, stiff, with a red and black checkerboard design. Larry moved slowly. And Larry wasn't very good at working, at least compared to the other men I'd worked with, strong men with ideas and know-how. Larry was anything of the sort. I had to tell him what to do, and if he actually succeeded in the task, like Larry, grab that bucket and wash down that glass panel over there, and point to it, and Larry did the job, and came back to the van with the soap bucket, placed it onto the hard street, lit up his Newport, and took a sip of his beer, the glass panel would still be dirty, and streaked, and dripping, because that was Larry. He had a long skinny neck with skin that seemed lighter than the rest of him, faded, like he had wrinkles and then got his skin restretched until it was tight again. His mustache was a wooded forest with half the trees cut down, like it was dying, altogether, all of him represented in those whiskers, those gray dying whiskers, below 2 tunnels, hollowed out by cocaine and collapsing, pink and brown, 2 sea worms wriggling beneath sad sagging eyes, 2 diamonds that held black sinking stones. Larry stayed drunk. Morning time shifts, afternoon lunches, special projects, demolitions, any manner of contact, or in telephone conversations, Larry was drunk. And I'd smoke blunts with him, his lips, without shame, engulfing the end of the cigar, and leaving a wet, damp tip, gooey brown, fuzzed together in moisture, his yellow-toothed smile winking gold, as he'd pass it back to me. "Here you go Jay, you take that," he'd say. And I'd take it from him, and try not to look. I'd grab it about halfway down, and blow the cherry off the top of it, then I'd cup it, in between 5 fingertips, and press my lips against them, like a diaphragm made of skin, so my lips never actually touched the blunt. And Larry wasn't watching anyway. He was too busy fiddling with his beer, scratching the bottom of his forearm above the wrist, staring out the window, his long neck craning, as if he'd never seen the world as we drove around the city blocks. Me and Larry. I remember it was a hot, late August morning, when I pulled up to the labor service to grab Larry for the day. Except when my van door opened, it wasn't Larry I saw. An old Nigerian man pulled himself up into the passenger seat. He was a guy Larry and I had worked with before. He was an old man, who had no business doing a day labor job, and a self-admitted functional crackhead, who needed the day's wage to pay for his room. "Yo Chiku, what's up man? Where's Larry?" "Larry dead Jay. They found him last week." "Oh man. Damn Chiku, I'm so sorry man. How did he die?" "Larry had AIDS Jay, you knew that." "Larry been sick man, shit. Larry been sick." And that was how I found out that Larry had AIDS. Full-blown AIDS. It was the year 2000, and there was still some of that AIDS hysteria in the air. If you went to elementary school, in the 80s, you learned the 3 ways a person could get AIDS, and saliva from the tip of a blunt wasn't one of them. But still I got myself tested. I didn't go to his wake, but I felt bad for his daughter. I knew, from talking to Larry, that she had had a hard life. I had worked with him for about 3 months that summer off and on. He was a terrible worker. He was a nice man. He was sick. This is for him.
My natural personality fits well in the corporate world. I'm bright, shiny, and smiley. I'm a morning person. If I didn't work remotely, I'd probably be the one bringing in donuts every Friday. And it's genuine, it's who I am. I don't fake it, which means it's hard for me to turn it on and off. Recently, I gave a presentation and I didn't do very well. I stumbled over my words and basically read straight from the notes in front of me. It wasn't a disaster, but I wasn't my usual sparkly self. Afterward, I could tell my boss was disappointed. His tone, usually warm and encouraging, was distant and firm. He didn't tell me I did a good job like he always does. He didn't smile. It felt like he regretted choosing me to represent the department. What he didn't know was that the day before, I got a call from the police in my home state. They told me my mother was suspected of having taken her own life. My mother and I have a complicated history, but the thought of her dying like that was still devastating. I won't go into the details, but it turned out to be a false alarm. She was okay. Still, for 10 solid minutes, I thought she was gone. And in those 10 minutes, the ground disappeared beneath me. The walls vanished. Time stopped. I was floating in a black void of panic, grief, and disbelief. And yet, the next day, I had to show up. So I did. I wasn't funny. I wasn't engaging. I wasn't the person everyone's used to seeing, but I got through it without falling apart. I'll never tell my boss what happened. He'll never know what I was carrying when I stood in front of that room. But maybe this story will remind someone to always lead with empathy. And that sometimes, just showing up is the very best we can do.
I wouldn't want to get into any trouble, so I decided to change the names of the places. But if you're curious, you can Google Panjakan and Sarazm. I'm from the city of Skibidi, one of the oldest cities in Central Asia. You may have heard of Jakepal or Old Skibidi. These places are over 5,500 years old. Every year we have archaeological excavations. Experts from all over the world come to explore the ancient layers of history, and for local school children it's a great opportunity to work during the summer. The process works like this. Archaeologists receive grants, hire students and assistants, and then recruit school children to do the rough work. How does it go? The chief archaeologists lead the process and monitor the correctness of the work. Assistants dig deep sections up to 12 meters or more. Students help, but only those prepared go into the pit. The school children, I was one of them, dig shallow layers about up to 2 meters deep and move the sand. I was 14 years old at the time, studying in the 8th grade. My friends and I worked on the excavations, and yes, it felt like playing Minecraft in real life. It was interesting but incredibly hard. The workday looked like this: wake up at 4 a.m., breakfast at 9 a.m., and we were free by 12 p.m. It was the end of August, and the work was supposed to finish in a week, but we were behind schedule. We had some finds, but not enough: old minted coins, large beautiful jugs. Then the chief archaeologist decided to move to the main excavations in Jakepal, where the best specialists were working. In Old Skibidi, his assistant, a graduate student, a few students, and we, the school children, stayed. This graduate student decided to impress foreign colleagues and archaeologists with his productivity and changed the schedule. Breakfast was at 4 a.m. and the work went on until 12 p.m. We worked in emergency mode. Many didn't like it, especially the experienced students who had been here for more than 1 year doing their internship. They argued among themselves for a long time, then came to us and said, "The graduate student wants us to dig a new 10-meter trench to show the approximate layout of the ancient city. But the location is on a sloping hill, and at this depth, without special equipment, everything could collapse at the 7 to 8 meter mark." The students did the calculations and were sure that the risk of a collapse was very high. However, the graduate student had already convinced the chief archaeologists, and they gave their approval, promising to pay us more. The students understood that arguing with the graduate student was useless. He acted like a child if anything went wrong. They thought about it and decided to malicious compliance and do everything as the graduate student ordered in his plan. After all, everything would collapse at night anyway, and we would get extra pay. So, they decided to make it as safe as possible and finish the job. They asked us to stay away from the new section. Everything was dug by experienced students, and we only moved the sand they passed up in buckets. The graduate student just sat and waited to make the markings at the end. He descended into the already finished trench, hammered in nails, and stretched threads to create even squares on the walls. A few days later, the work was completed. Instead of artifacts, we found important information about the layout of ancient streets. At 12 p.m., we gathered for our last shared lunch, sitting across from the pit, chatting and joking about how we would foolishly spend the earned money. At that moment, the graduate student was finishing the markings. He was standing on a 10-meter ladder in the pit, carefully hammering nails and stretching the marking threads. We lazily watched him, some sitting, some lying, sipping water. And then, half of the wall suddenly collapsed, dragging the graduate student down. There was a loud crash, and a cloud of dust filled the pit. A couple of students immediately jumped up, put on respirators, and jumped down. A few minutes later, people from the base, which was 50 meters away, rushed to help. Collapses are not rare here. We had seen them more than once. But they usually happened at night, not during the day, in front of everyone. After this incident, safety measures were tightened. The graduate student survived but sustained serious injuries. They said he looked like a mummy in the hospital, but as far as I know, he's fine now and continues to work. In the end, the students were wrong. The graduate student had calculated it correctly, and the collapse shouldn't have happened. It all happened because of a single nail he hammered too hard, disturbing the balance of the wall. But if he had just done everything as before and not started digging the new section, perhaps all of this could have been avoided.